You've got a very complicated degree.
Yeah.
What is your official degree, and what do you do?
Yeah. So I did my undergraduate dual major in physics with a concentration in astrophysics and mathematics. And during that time, I did research in radio astronomy. I went on to do my PhD in astrophysics, but specifically in gravitational waves and general relativity. So the shape of our universe, how gravity works, that sort of stuff. After that, I did research for a little bit. I went into public education. I worked at museums and community colleges. Then I worked as a systems engineer, and now I work in the entertainment industry as the science advisor for Star Trek.
Wow, that's a handful. Do we need to look behind us?
Gravitational waves? Well, I was part of the team that did win a Nobel Prize, and so I had left the collaboration before they made their Nobel Prize winning detection. But I think what was so interesting about that was we're in an era of science research where it requires huge teams of people to make some of these discoveries. So what I was a part of, I worked and I got my PhD at the University of Glasgow, but that was one of like 50 universities with nearly 1,000 people all over the world working to detect these gravitational waves. So I left in 2014, and then in 2015, they made their detection. But, I loosened the jar lid, so it was okay.
Like a pickle jar, yes.
Yeah.
So how long was the total research time? If you left a year before it was discovered, approved?
Yeah, detected.
Detected, yeah.
Yep, yeah. So so the story behind gravitational waves is that this is something that Einstein had predicted back in 1915, I think, was when he published the paper on the idea that when something happens on space-time, so you may have seen that idea of a gravity well with like a bowling ball and a trampoline.
Yeah.
What Einstein did was like, well, what if the bowling ball explodes? And then went through all the math and was like, oh, the trampoline is going to ripple. It's going to send out waves. But when he did the math for that, he was like, they're so small, no one will ever detect them. And scientists went, challenge accepted. and there was some research done in the 50s and 60s trying to detect them through having these big metal bars that would resonate at the gravitational wave frequency. But they weren't able to do it because it was too specific and not sensitive enough. And then in the 90s, that's when guys started coming up with the idea of these interferometers. So what they do is they shoot laser light down at a splitter. So half of the laser goes one direction and half gets reflected down another arm at 90 degrees. They hit mirrors at the end, they bounce back and then recombine. And if a gravitational wave passes by, the distance of those arms is going to be different, and so you're going to get an interference pattern when the laser comes back. It's a lot of science I just threw at you, but so they built those in the 90s, and then I started my PhD in 2009, and they were just in the process of decommissioning them and rebuilding them. They've basically done a ton of science to make them 10 times more sensitive, and because space is a volume, that means they'd be 1,000 times more, they'd see 1,000 times more stuff, and that took 5 years. So they went down in 2010, they did all of this like upgrades to it, and then the week that they were gonna turn them on, they got their first signal. And so yeah, it's really, really cool effort.
Will the average person ever have any inkling of gravitational waves and an effect on them?
They are incredibly small. They're passing through us all the time, and we just never think about it. The distances that I'm talking about, so those arms I think were about 5 kilometers long. The distance in length that those are changing are 1/1000th the size of an atom. And so it's incredibly small distances. And yes, the mirrors are made of atoms, the whole thing. It's an amazing amount of understanding noise and statistics and physics to be able to do that.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a bunch of science.
Really cool. Yeah, it's really, really neat.
So your head full of science led you to books and the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
How did that segue over?
So
and I guess a little background. What is it? What intellectual properties did it translate to, and how did it translate to them?
Well, when I was in graduate school, I got really into Star Trek. I had been into it a little bit as an undergraduate, but I never grew up with it. And then when I was in graduate school, I had moved overseas. I was living on my own, and I just watched a ton of Star Trek. And I'm an astrophysics major, so there's a lot of fellow Star Trek fans. And as I was procrastinating writing my dissertation, I started thinking, like, because I'm watching all this Star Trek as well, I'm like, I could probably figure out how warp drive works. and like, I have that skill set now. And so I just, for fun, was like looking at what other people did and how warp travel would actually work. And then that kind of percolated a little bit into my teaching that I was doing as an academic. But then when I left teaching, really, that's when I missed it so much that I started coming to DragonCon and other conventions to give science talks using science fiction. DragonCon especially has science panels that are very specifically science, but they do also integrate some science fiction. And I think what's great is that science is sometimes not very approachable for people, and especially physics and astronomy. It's cool to think about, but we can't picture a lot of it. Like, it's really hard to visualize some of the science. And so I think what's great about science fiction is you're able to give a reference point, even if you're using that reference point to be like, this isn't how it works. But true. So obviously Star Trek now, that's where I work. It's all started with convention talks, is how I got on their radar to actually get my job. But then I also love talking about Star Wars. I love talking about Mass Effect. I love talking about a lot of different sci-fi franchises. Just anything that people connect with.
What's the most ludicrous thing we would see in any of those IPs that really exists and that's a functional technology?
I think, so what's cool, I mean, not to, go have my go-to on brand, but with Star Trek, I think what's great about it is it's been around for now almost 60 years, and the technology that we saw in 1966 when it was airing,
the comms or whatever,
the communicators, they're video chatting with each other in different parts of the ship, like, that's so normal to us now, but that was really science fiction back at that time. I think now we're on the cusp of some new technologies that we have seen in Star Trek before. Things like the tricorders, so that's what they use to like do a medical scan and figure out what's wrong with you. I think through the pandemic, it's like necessity breeds invention, and so this idea of doing more distance medical care kind of started to drive that technology a bit. But also,
like the teledoc.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, we're wearing devices that aren't invasive, but they're still able to tell a lot about our health and
pulse
our medicine.
rate, steps, etc.
Exactly. And the other thing that we're kind of on the cusp of, I think maybe in my lifetime, would be something like a replicator. So because we have two different sciences that are working in parallel but advancing very quickly. One is 3D printing. The other one is food science. 15 years ago, some people may remember, but veggie burgers sucked.
Yeah, they were horrible.
They were horrible. And then food science found this protein that specifically made red meat taste like red meat. And they were able to synthesize that protein and create things like Beyond Meat or Impossible burgers. And so that sort of technology, the fact that you're able to synthetically mimic food with all this 3D printing technology that's continuing to increase, I think we'll at least get a 3D printed burger patty.
Really?
It's just going to might take 4 hours and be kind of crummy, but but I do think like that. And what's so cool though too is because Star Trek has been around for so long and so many other science fiction like it, but it has inspired so many people to go into science. And so there are people who, kind of like me as well, as you're going through your scientific career, you have that little bug in your brain that's like, I really want a replicator. And so people will devote their careers to this sort of thing. And that's exciting because they saw it on television.
That's cool. Did you have something there?
Yeah. In your work as a Department of Defense System Engineering Technical Advisor, do you use any of this information?
Yeah, so I did that after I left academia, and it's actually really similar to the job I have now working in the entertainment industry. So I essentially help the government and the people who are working as federal employers help them understand the science behind what they're contracting. So, for example, if the government is trying to buy a satellite system, they're going out to different companies to see who can build it and find the best price and the best technology. And my job was to look at what they're proposing And, sometimes companies really want the contract and they'll fudge the numbers a little bit. And so it was my job to kind of be like, I don't think this is really
verify.
just verify. Yeah. And so just be like an impartial advisor. But a lot of that job was science communication, honestly, because I would be working for, there'd be a lieutenant colonel or even all the way up to a general, having to explain stuff at whatever level they were at. Some people had very technical backgrounds, other people had no scientific background. And so having to sort of find the right way to communicate the science in a way that they understood without making them feel dumb, I think is really the skill set that I used a lot for that.
So you're like a satellite actuary of sorts?
Kind of, yeah. It's a really, so I would just be in all the meetings with the representatives, whoever I was working for, and help explain after the meeting, kind of give my debrief and my thoughts on it. If you saw Space Force on Netflix,
yeah.
I was John Malkovich.
Okay.
That's the best way to describe that. So yeah, really fun, really
Did
cool
you get to
job.
work on any classified projects?
I can't talk about that,
Oh,
but
that's
I know.
awesome.
Any previous classified that are now declassified?
Yeah, I really can't talk about it, unfortunately, but certainly just a lot of satellite works.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was, what was interesting is my research was so theoretical astrophysics, right? They hadn't detected anything, but what I was doing was trying to find ways to funnel and analyze a lot of data that we're getting from looking up. And then I basically just went into a career where it was the exact same idea, you're just looking down. And so you're trying to figure out these data pipelines and churn through a lot of noise and figure out how to be accurate. So that's where a lot of those skills come from. Yeah, it was fun.
If I can ask one more space question, then we'll get to the book. Presuming we get to the point to where there's an Enterprise or some sort of spaceship out there to where that can venture, how will it propel itself?
Yeah. So, the biggest problem, the biggest limiter we have to space travel is just the speed of light. And that's not this arbitrary thing that the universe has imposed on us. The speed of light, the reason we call that is because of the shape of our universe. So again, the bowling ball on the trampoline, that bowling ball's trying to move through space. The lighter it is, the easier it is to move through space. And then eventually you could have particles like light particles that have no mass and they just coast in a straight line at a fixed speed. And so that's the speed of light. But as soon as you have any mass, any spaceship, that's going to slow you down a little bit. And the nearest star system to us is over 4 light years away. So even if we were able to travel anywhere close to the speed of light, which we're not able to, it would still take us at least a decade to get there. At least. That's being very generous right now.
That's once the ship is built.
Exactly.
Which is decades away.
Yeah. And so in terms of human exploration, we're going to have, I try to be optimistic about it because I love science fiction and I want that future. But we're going to have like an unknown, we can't predict the technology that we're going to need to be able to do that. But what is fun is this idea of warp travel that we see in Star Trek is scientifically possible. The way it works is that the way I described the speed of light being a limit, that's for stuff on the surface of space-time. Mm-hmm. But nothing says that space-time itself can't go faster than the speed of light.
And so that it would bend of sorts.
So it wraps around your ship and then space-time pushes your ship faster than the speed of light, and you're contained inside this bubble where you're not breaking the laws of physics. And the math checks out on that. The problem is that it requires a huge, unconceivable amount of energy to be able to do that and to be able to bend space-time. And so that's where that discovery would need to happen to be able to do that. But I remain optimistic.
And I do have one more space question, but I'll ask at the end.
Yeah. Okay,
your book,
no worries.
It's a board book you have out.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
okay.
baby board book.
Yes.
Yeah, it's called Star Trek, My First Book of Space. It's published by Ben Bella Books, and we have a companion with it, which is Star Trek, My First Book of Colors, written by my friend Rob Perlman. And but I wrote the space part of it. And what I really enjoyed about that was it was such a writing challenge for me, because I can talk space to sort of any age group, really. But trying to distill space knowledge to basically 11 sentences with Star Trek references in it. But what I'm proud about that book is we wanted to be very careful to not conflate the fiction of Star Trek with the real part of space. And so some of those details is like the text itself is just pure science. It's got fun little Star Trek Easter eggs, but it's just pure science. And then the drawings and the illustrations we have are real pictures of space superimposed with cartoon images of Star Trek. So trying to just subtly drive home the real versus the fictional. But, it's fun for Star Trek parents to...
And it's a board book, so it's chewable. It's got a great spine.
Chewable, yep, exactly. You can do a lot of damage to it, yeah.
How long did it take you to make the book?
It took me, I would say, sort of beginning to end, probably 2 or 3 months from like getting the gig to writing a first draft, bouncing it back between the editors. But what was really funny about that was I had one page near the end of the book where I talk about dark matter. And I just said, like, we don't know anything about dark matter. And the editor got back and they were like, can you explain a little bit more about what dark matter is? And I was like, not really, because we actually don't know anything about dark matter. Like, I have said the limit of human knowledge on dark matter here. And so that sort of thing was really fun, too.
Are you familiar with Chris Ferry?
Yeah.
He's got some great board books in that same vein.
I love those.
Aren't
I buy
they
those for all my friends. Yeah.
We do, that's what we got for Elizabeth back in the day. Yeah.
Nice.
Like quantum
physics
for
babies.
Physics for babies.
Yeah.
What
general relativity for
babies. Because it sounds like your book is very similar to that because it's factually true and so simple that I still don't understand it. But when I read his book, which is what I presume is what happened when I read yours, it would introduce me to a world of facts in space that I otherwise didn't know.
Yeah, and what's interesting too is when you get an assignment like that, it's just, because it's an IP, you're kind of writing it on assignment, they're just like, write a book about space and Star Trek for babies, and you have 11 pages. And so it's like, well, where do you start? And the one thing I really like doing is establishing our sort of cosmological address. So like starting here on Earth and then zooming out from there. And I think that's a good way to sort of introduce people to the concept of space.
Beautiful. Do you work for NASA?
No, but I have friends who do, yeah. And I've interacted with them a lot in the past. It's really fun. I got to speak at NASA once.
Are you investigating the immense amount of energy that would be necessary to wrap space-time around the spaceship and propel you forward?
I mean, it's one of those interesting things because there's a lot of sort of people are just working independently on so many different things, and so it's one of those where you'll have people who are working on energy, trying to develop new methods. It would be a lot more of like particle and nuclear physics working on that stuff, but then calling their buddy who works in gravitational waves and being like, hey, I think we found, so it's like that's where the collaborative nature of it comes in. They're not doing it. They're not writing their proposals or getting their research money specifically to find that stuff, but it's one of those knowing what it could be applied to helps that really collaborative nature of science. Yeah.